I was born June 11, 1936 in Yugoslavia, which at that time consisted of 5 republics with different religion. We had a king and we had a prime minister. And I was born probably in a private hospital and confirmed and baptized at the age of 8 days, which is the practice in my religion. My mother was Russian Orthodox, and at the time that I was baptized, I was confirmed as well.
Wow. What was your mother's name and your father's name?
My mother's name was Anya Bezubov, and my father's name was Nicholas Dichovichny.
What language did you speak in your home?
We spoke Russian, mostly, not Yugoslavian, but Russian. And we also had a German governess which taught us German language, which I tried to forget when occupation started.
And you have siblings?
I have one brother who was born 2 years later after me, and we had a very happy and beautiful childhood.
Where was your home? Where was your childhood home?
My home was in Belgrade, which was capital of the whole country, all 5 republics. It was the biggest city in Yugoslavia, about 2.5 million people, with beautiful buildings, clean streets, and very friendly people.
Were there, in the city of Belgrade, were there Greek Orthodox, there were Roman Catholics, there were Jewish people?
Yes, yes. There are quite a few Jewish people, and I know that Jewish people visited our home.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of your home life?
Oh yes, that was part of my home life.
What was your house like? What was your home like?
My father found this house that he rented because he was building a house for our family. The house had 30 rooms, beautiful kitchen, everything you could possibly want, beautiful garden, lots of trees. It was really, really beautiful. A place for a car, because we had an American car. We had Packard.
Wow. Packard, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's an American car.
Yeah. So your family was well-to-do?
My family was well-to-do because my dad was an architect and a builder, and he had his own firm, and he was building homes mainly on the Dalmatian coast, but also in the city, and also bunkers for the soldiers because they're anticipating the war.
They were?
Yes.
So they expected?
They expected the Germans would march through.
Wow. That must have been terrifying.
It was terrifying. They started bombing the cities, and then they would march with the soldiers and march through the best roads and just make themselves at home. They would take homes that they felt were suitable for them. They didn't ask you if you wanted to move or not, and they would just stay there. They took all the food that they needed or wanted, and we were rationed.
So the invasion was, do you remember the invasion?
Yes, the invasion was on March 27th, 1941. It was in my country, but there are several European countries that already invaded. But that's when we were invaded.
Do you remember that day?
Yes, yes. My mother was horrified because Dad joined the army to make country safe. He felt that he was needed to fight, and he provided all kinds of things so we could make it through the invasion. But of course we didn't have much of anything because Germans just took whatever they needed. And my mother, I remember the day we were bombed, she was running around and dumping big cans of gasoline. She was afraid that they would go on fire, which is a very, very terrible thing that she did, you know, just dumping gasoline on the lawn or in the garden. She was,
Your father was away at war at
Oh,
that
yes,
point.
he was already gone.
So she was on her own.
She was on her own. I think he was gone about a month before we were invaded.
How old was your mother at this point?
My mother was 24,
She was young,
very young.
with two young children at home.
2 young children at home, 2 younger sisters, a younger brother, and that's it. And then she didn't know how to cook or take care of anything, and she had to learn the hard way.
To that point, she had help in the house.
Yes, we had a cook, we had 2 ladies who cleaned the house, and a governess for us. And, you know, any help that was needed, we had. And my father liked to entertain people, so, and my mother too. And we always had a house full of guests, always. And there was always food, because Russian people, like Italian, they like to entertain and cook and give you food.
So the day of the invasion, where were you?
It was early in the morning. It started about between 6 and 7 in the morning. So I woke up from the noise because the bombs were falling around. The soldiers were marching, people were running away, and that's what woke us up. And what happened is we had friends in the country, and my mother just took the 2 of us and we walked to the village, one of the villages, and that's where we stayed for a little while.
How far from the city was that?
Well, it depends, but the one we went to probably was about 6 kilometers.
So you were maybe 4.5.
Yes, I was 4.5,
And your
brother
brother
was
was
2.5,
younger.
yes. And then my aunts were probably late teenagers, and my uncle.
And you remember that walk?
Oh, yes, yes.
And who did you stay with in the next village that you went to?
It was just a nice family. They had 4 children of their own. They grew their own food. I think they raised wheat. And they were very nice. They provided for us. You know, and so my mother did have money to give it to them. So that helped a little. I don't know where they went to get food or anything, but they were able to. Probably they made their own. You know, they raised cattle, they raised sheep, and I remember drinking sheep's milk, goat's milk.
Oh,
Yes,
What an experience.
what an experience.
So then you returned home to the city.
We returned to the city probably at the end of the month, maybe sometime in April, we returned to the city. And at that time, half of our house was demolished because the bomb fell on part of it. And my mother said we better move. My dad built a beautiful home with about 12 apartments, 5 floors, and there was one empty apartment. And my mother said it would be easier if we moved there.
right.
Besides, the Germans felt that it was such a well-built home that it would be a shelter when we were bombed. So people would gather in the basement whenever the bombs fell and it was time for us to go. The siren would sound out, and then you would walk to your shelters. The Germans assigned shelters.
So where was your father when this was going on? Was he in war?
My father decided he didn't want to come back because he knew that the Germans would be looking for him. First of all, he spoke fluent German, and he graduated from University of Berlin in architecture and a civil engineer. And he knew that they would be looking for him to build certain things, and he didn't want to collaborate with the Germans at all.
So he stayed.
He stayed at the Dalmatian coast.
Okay. Where is that, Nina, down fishing coast?
It belongs to Montenegro.
Okay, part of
And
Yugoslavia.
it is part of Yugoslavia. It's right on the Adriatic coast.
Mhm.
Beautiful, beautiful. We went there every summer for vacation.
Mhm.
Did your father come home?
No, my father never came home. My mother kept saying, he'll be home, the war will end, he'll be home. And when May 9th that the war ended, she said he would be home today. Of course, he never came.
That was 1945, right?
45, and we heard from some people from the Dalmatian coast that my father was killed. He was defending some villagers who didn't give food to the Germans, and the Germans were yelling at them, and my father was defending them, especially since he spoke German. And they lined everyone around a big hole, shot them all, and just threw them in the hole. So we never really knew where my father's remnants were or anybody else's.
Terrible.
How did your mother cope with the war and young children and not having her husband around?
Well, my mother was a very religious person, and she relied on God and God's good grace. And I remember we prayed every night, every morning, every noon, and she always said, we have each other and we have God in Christ. And Christ and God will save us. And she really observed all the holidays, like when we had, during Easter, before Easter, we had to fast. We didn't eat at all. We would have a little bit of water and a little bit of bread. Even children observed the fasting. And, whether it was right or not, I don't know, but we did it and we survived.
But you talked about the conditions at home, that your dad left supplies, but eventually all of that wore out.
Everything was gone. First of all, we shared with other people, and once it was gone, it was gone. The Germans had places where you could go and get a piece of bread every day, and the bread was very hard cornbread. And you would get it and bring it home and eat it with some water. We had no milk. There was really nothing, no other food. The Germans took whatever they needed or wanted.
How about the conditions in the home? Were there lights and heat?
Well, we had to dim the lights. We had the lights in the beginning. You had to dim the lights whenever they were bombing, and they continued to bomb cities everywhere. And you had to pull the shades, and you really weren't allowed to have electricity, but everybody had lamps with gasoline, and that's what we would burn. The heat was more difficult. We had these very tall, like big stoves that you would put coal in, and it would warm it up. The whole room, every room had one of those. And you were able to get coal in the beginning and a little bit of wood. But then after maybe a couple of months, you couldn't get any heat at all. You couldn't get any coal, you couldn't get any wood, because the Germans needed it to heat their places. And so I remember how very brutally cold it was. And I developed a lot of frostbites on my feet and my hands. And the frostbites turned into sores, and my mother had to take care of it.
Oh my gosh.
So at this age, you should have been growing rapidly on such a meager diet.
It is a very meager diet, no milk. Well, we had apples in the winter time. Most often we had potatoes and cabbage. Sometimes we had corn, but everything else just weren't able to get. I remember my brother and I had a lot of childhood diseases. We had measles, everything, scarlet fever, you name it, we had it. And we had a pediatrician who told my mother that we should have goat's milk and that was helpful and would help us. And apparently he did a good job because we recovered.
Good, very good.
What about school for you while this was
Oh,
going on?
we started school at the age of 6. You, of course, didn't have kindergarten because there was no place of kindergarten, there was no room for school. So the old schools were there and we walked to school, they're in the neighborhood. So we were able to walk to school and we would stay there unless the silence sounded and then you were asked to go home.
You talked about having Jewish friends in the home.
Yes,
And the Jewish people, what was their experience in Yugoslavia?
Well, they must have been terrible because as a 4.5-year-old, I remember walking with my 2 aunts and I saw this bus go by us and there was a lot of screaming in there. And my aunt explained it to us that they were Jewish people, that they were driving to camps, to the different camps. But it was such a terrible cry. They cried, you could hear them asking for help, and there was no help at all.
Nothing to do.
Were there stars on doors?
Yes, every door with a Jewish person had a star on it.
Was did they empty out the city of all Jewish people?
They must have, because I don't remember seeing any Jewish people after what, because my father had a lot of friends. My mother knew a lot of people, and they disappeared, so they must have been taken. Awful.
How do you think you understood that as a 4 or 5-year-old?
You know, I think that we must have been scared, my brother and I, but Mom always said, you know, pray, think about good times, and we'll make it. And we did.
You did have 2 dogs.
Yes, we had 2 beautiful dogs. My father loved hunting, and he had, it must have been a property for hunting, where he would take his friends, and they would hunt. And he had 4 or 5 dogs. They used to live in the house during the winter time, and then he would take them for hunting. And we had these 2 beautiful dogs, they're about maybe 50 pounds, and they're so sweet, and my brother and I just loved them. And one day they didn't come home, and my mother said, you know, people must have taken them for food.
Yeah.
What the people did, they would kill animals and eat them. They did dogs, cats, horses, anything that moved to survive.
You told us a story about your mother being taken by the SS.
Yes, yes. My mother was called to come to the Gestapo building because they wanted to talk to her about my dad. They felt that she knew where he was. So they called her to come and talk to them. And my brother and I stayed home, but after a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, we decided we better walk and see how she was doing. So she came out of the Gestapo and she was very shaken. She was pale and very, very shaken. And she took us by the hands and we walked home. And once she got home, she went to bed. And after that, she couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. She must have had the doctors thought she had a nervous breakdown. And he felt that there was some kind of jolt would get her, would make her able to walk. Now we asked Mom what happened in the questioning, and she said they really didn't hit her or do anything to her, but they're hitting other prisoners. And she was so afraid just watching how they reacted. They're all men, by the way. And they would sick dogs and then big German shepherds and have them bite the poor guys. And that's what really shook her up. It wasn't anything that they did to her, physically.
Traumatized.
It was a psychological.
She was traumatized, yes.
So who took care of you while Mom was?
Well, my aunts were there and my uncle, they were close to 20, so they were able to do that. How they got food, I don't remember. We just ate bread. And our treat was to have that hard cornbread, and you would put some bacon grease on it and spray it with paprika, and it was delicious.
Do you still eat it this day?
No, no, I told my children about it. They know.
What was it like once Yugoslavia was liberated? Then came the Russians, correct?
Right, it wasn't much better. Although the Russians were supposed to be better because we had relationship with them. And they're Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, you'd think they would be a little bit better, but they weren't. They were looking for food, they were looking for watches. My mother had a very expensive Movado watch that my dad gave her, and she traded it to the Russians for flour and sugar. A little sack of flour and a sack of sugar. They drank rubbing alcohol, which even as a child, I couldn't understand. They just needed to drink. They weren't very nice to women.
They weren't.
No, they were not. They were
Abusive.
not. Abusive, yes, very abusive.
In the worst way, right?
The worst way, and they didn't stay there too long. I think it was maybe 2 years. And then the Americans liberated. Well, actually, Tito came. I don't know how he happened to come to Yugoslavia, but supposedly we voted, and we voted him in. And he was living in one of the most beautiful places in Belgrade. And during the summer, he lived at the coast in a villa called Scheherazade that my father built.
Wow.
And it was absolutely gorgeous because I remember seeing it as a child. It's still there.
Is it still
It's
there?
still there,
Wow.
yes.
Have you been back to Yugoslavia since?
I was there once, just once. And the funny, interesting thing is, when I went and walked around the city, it looked very drab and dark and didn't look happy like what I remembered.
Right.
And the only building that I recognized immediately was where Gestapo was located. That was the only building just came to my eyes immediately.
You talk about your mother's faith. You are a very faithful person.
Oh, yes, oh,
Faithful
yes,
person.
oh, very.
So I guess my question to you is, how did you feel and how do you feel about the German people after your experience in
I
Yugoslavia?
have no grudge against German people. I feel that they did what their government wanted them to do. Whether they could help it or not, I don't know. But I don't hold them responsible for all the atrocities that they did. I do hold responsible people, Gestapo and Nazi, because they knew what they were doing. They really did. So I don't feel any love toward them.
Understood. Do you forgive them? Can you forgive them? Not yet.
I had a difficult time.
That's okay. God's okay with that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Every time I get very, very upset with one particular person, I feel bad. I feel that I'm not a good Christian to do that. But then when I remember all the things that they did, I said, they killed so many innocent people. And the thing that I really never forgave them, if a child was born to a woman and wasn't perfect, had some kind of a disability or had a terrible illness, they would order that woman to have a child killed.
Oh my gosh.
And I guess the poor woman even had to watch how they did it. I don't know, I have never seen it, but I know that they did.
terrible.
And that's why, you know, there are a couple of things I can't forgive.
Not that,
No,
it's okay.
We live in difficult times, nothing like what you lived through. And often it's easy to want to hide away from things, what's actually going on, ignore the news and so forth, or to become overwhelmed and sad. What advice do you offer people who seem to be very difficult? How do you get through things?
I personally, for me, it's church and prayer. And also trying to be good as many people as you can, to help people if you can, because I think it's important for us to love each other.
How, and you are the epitome of love, by the way. There's no doubt in our minds.
I hope so.
Well, you are, no worries. How did you get to the United States? And how did that happen?
I came to the United States in 1956, in the fall of 56. I already completed a year and a half of college university in Belgrade. First, I want to tell you that I went through the steps from finishing elementary school, then you're tested to see if you're able to cope with middle school for 4 years, which I did. Then they test you again to see if you're high school material, which I did. And I had very, very good grades. And I wanted to go to medical school. And my mother said, you know, you're so little. There's so much demand on the doctor. Maybe you better think about something else. So then I thought I would try to be a mechanical engineer. Needless to say, women weren't welcome. So I did literature and languages. And I completed a year and a half. And I had an aunt who lived in Detroit, Michigan. And she told me that I should try to come and stay with her and go to an American college. And she sponsored me. And I came in the fall of 56. The college already started for a couple of months. So we sent my transcripts. And the college gave me 2 years of college education for my diploma, high school diploma. And I started to, and I didn't speak English. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay because I had English in high school and at the university. So it helped me to understand. The problem was that American slang is different.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to get used to it, but it was all right.
Good.
And I also felt that American college students were very immature. I felt was so much mature than they were, but it's probably because of all the experiences that I had.
So what did you decide to major in?
Well, I majored in political science, but I always liked politics. So I majored in political science. And that's where I met my husband. And I was supposed to stay in the States 1 year and go back. And my husband and his family didn't want me to go back. So we got married. And here I am.
Did you like him right away when you met him?
Yes, he was a very kind person. He helped a lot of foreign students, as you can imagine.
Yes.
He helped anyone, so he was very, very nice.
So you became married, and then you went on to more education, correct?
Oh yes, well I didn't go to school for a couple of years, and I started we were living in Clifton, and our house was right below Montclair State. And Montclair State, they're building it, they're blowing the rocks and they're building buildings. And I walked up there and talked to someone, and they, the reason I really started is because my husband was learning disabled. His family didn't know he was learning disabled. He was reading everything backwards, writing everything backwards, and his parents felt that they're responsible for it. And I really wanted to find out what it was all about, because I've never met a person who reversed letters or reversed numbers. I've never met a person like that. So I talked to someone at Montclair State. They told me to sign up for a master's in reading. And I got my master's in teaching at the same time, reading, teaching. Then after I finished that, I decided to do for learning disabilities. And so that was my second master's. And I didn't know enough about early childhood education. So I took some extra credits, 75 credits.
Oh, just a few.
In your spare time, right?
But I'll tell you, college was so much cheaper then than it is now.
Yes.
It was unbelievable.
How many children do you have now?
I have 3 children. I have son James, who comes here as much as he can, or whenever he's here, because he loves this church, and he wishes he could find one like that in Virginia, which he can't. So he'll be coming. I have a daughter, Patricia, who is at the moment in Canada. She became a Canadian citizen. She has a husband and 2 children who were born in Canada. And I have son Robert, who was born and raised, and he was an acolyte, you name it, and he did it. And he is at the moment in Glen Rock, New Jersey.
How did you find St. James Church?
Oh,
Because you're Greek Orthodox,
Yes, yes.
right?
My father-in-law, actually the Steadman family lived on LaSalle Road, which is very close to the cemetery. And they were coming to church to St. James. And that's how they brought me here for Christmas, one of the Christmas Sunday in 1956.
Right.
And I was in awe. It was the most beautiful church. And I sat there, and the priest came out. He spoke. I understood what he was saying. He gave a beautiful sermon, didn't ask me to kiss his hand, and there was no incense. And I fell in love. I thought I died and went to heaven. I really did. My husband knows I was sitting there in awe. There is something like that. And my mother-in-law said to my husband, you know, you should honor her religion, and you should go to church with her. So he asked me if I would like to go to a Russian or a Greek Orthodox church, and I said no. I found my church.
And you've been here ever since?
I've been here ever since.